And that's big trouble for them.
You've
said a lot about South Africa in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's hosting the G20 summit this year. Are you planning to attend this, or are you skipping it and telling your cabinet to not?
Well, we'll see what happens, but the South African situation is very, very dangerous and very bad for a lot of people. There's tremendously bad things going on, including the confiscation of property, and worse, much worse than that. You know what I'm talking about. And we're not making any payment until we find out what's going on in South Africa. Yes,
What's next for Kellogg?
Africa has tremendous business potential. I have so many friends going to your countries trying to get rich. I congratulate you. They're spending a lot of money. But it has a tremendous business potential and representing huge amounts of different markets, and for American firms, it's really become a place that they have to go, that they want to go. 6 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. Increasing American trade and investment across diverse industries, including agriculture, energy, transportation, healthcare, travel, and tourism, will further transform lives throughout the continent.
So apparently the Trump administration is going to allow white South Africans to seek asylum because they're mad because the majority black population is standing on business and taking back a lot of the stuff that the white South Africans were able to essentially create on their shoulders during the apartheid state. I wish Americans would just stop this pretense that it's not about brown people. It's about brown people. And I'm so exhausted by it. Because, like, if you could just say that out loud, no one was for this when it was brown people from south of the border trying to escape violence. No one was for this when it was black Africans trying to escape violence. No one was for this when it was brown Middle Eastern people trying to escape violence. But it's white South Africans escaping, getting their, giant pieces of farmland and their mansions taken by the government that they only have because of long-term subjugation. Oh no! Will we please think of the rich whites? You're too loud with the subtext. Just say what you mean. Like, that's the part I'm so exhausted about. Just say what you mean already. Save us all the struggle of, like, having to do this back and forth. Because we already know, you clearly know. Just say the real thing out loud. Say it's about brown people. Say it's about brown people.
So I grew up in apartheid South Africa as a English-speaking white boy. I only became politically conscious when I was already 18 years of age, because prior to that, I had been subjected to and sucked in this incredible propaganda of victimization of the white people, where every piece of news, every message we were getting, every joke, the butt of every joke was the stupidity of the black man, the inability of the black man to look after himself, never mind the country, to be ignorant, uneducated, break everything he touched. The messaging was that all violence was black violence, that all crime was black crime, that you had to fear black people. And a huge amount of that fear was that if we let them into the political process, into the governance of the country, that they would do to us exactly what we had done to them for decades, which would be to turn around and oppress us, to murder us, to take our stuff, to move into our houses. It was a very popular story that the ANC, prior to the 94 election, when it was still an illegal organization and Nelson Mandela was still in jail, and the armed wing was exiled to Zambia and Mozambique, Umkhonto we Sizwe, was that they promised all of our domestic servants that those servants would be given the house they worked in when the ANC ruled. And these stories were told amongst the whites to bolster our resolve never to let these black people run our country. And it was only when I became conscious of that from 18 onwards that I realized not only was this a terrible lie that was actually oppressing us as well as the people that we as a white nation, white minority, were oppressing, but that actually What happened subsequently from 1994 onwards was far more of a reflection of the nature of black South Africans than any fears we as white South Africans had been fed and believed, right? And I see direct parallels with what's happening in Palestine and Israel. We've been fed this bullshit of Israel as victim, of the Zionist government as defending, this idea that the entire Arab world wanted to wipe them off the map, when in fact, prior to the Nakba, prior to Palestine being given to Israel by the colonial powers, primarily Britain, many Jews lived very happily and harmoniously alongside Muslims and Christians within that region. They weren't oppressed there. They became the oppressor through the Zionist ambition of a few Israelis. White government for many, many years in South Africa needed the violence of Umkhonto we Sizwe. They needed the odd bomb to go off. They needed terror attacks because it justified the further repression. And I've told stories about when I was in the South African Defence Force in 1987-88, 88-89. The things that were done by the intelligence service to undermine the ANC and other liberation struggles, and to pit black against black, to distract black people from action against the oppressive minority and the history of oppression. And it's time to step aside from what we've been told and look at the truth, look at the reality, look at the history, educate ourselves, and make a moral judgment based on our real values as a human. Hey lovely people, and particularly a quick word to my American friends who might be tempted to believe what Donald Trump is saying about South Africa, my home country, where I happen to be right now. Him and Elon Musk are racist twats who have no fucking idea what they're talking about. Because what they're doing is taking the word of a fringe racist group called AfriForum and other disaffected whites, disgruntled by the end of apartheid, feeling hard done by, and much like the Israelis, victimizing themselves when they are not victims at all. Bitching about how, land redistribution is racist against whites. These are such ignorant provocateurs, and it's going to backfire on them. South Africans' majority, the black majority, and it's a multiracial, multi-tribal society now, only own a tiny proportion of the land versus the size of their population. And while white South Africans make up 7% of the population, more or less, they own about 70% of the decent land. And so the redistribution of land is to address past inequities, and the vast majority of South Africans agree and understand why that's happening and that it's a good thing. It's also under a very strict mechanism. Now, not everyone agrees, of course, with the mechanism, but the principle is what racists like Musk and Trump are railing against here on behalf of a bunch of assholes who equate equality with oppression, because for so many years, decades and decades of the apartheid era, they were the oppressor. And as we know, whenever the oppressor looks at something like equality, it suddenly becomes oppression of him. So fuck Elon Musk, fuck these idiots from AfriForum. You probably know nothing about them, but this is a bunch of, the equivalent of your kind of Proud Boys hanging on to some past that never actually existed, and a past in which the vast majority of people in this country were oppressed, suppressed, and treated much like, fortunately not quite as badly as the Israelis treat the Palestinians. So this whole railing against South Africa, I'm going to add one more point. South Africans on the whole, all of us, white, black, Indian, colored, which is not a term, is a specific term for those of you who might get offended by that, a specific racial group. We are very, very resilient people. As a country, we have gone through a great deal, both in terms of the early part and then the transition from the apartheid era to genuine multicultural democracy. And whatever Trump throws at us, we can handle. We can handle it because we've been through far, far worse in our history. And my hope is that South Africans all turn around with one voice and tell Trump to fuck off with his sanctions and his fucking withdrawal of aid and his tariffs and all of this stuff, because we can live through it. What I'm not sure about is whether Americans can, because for the most part, all the stuff that Vivek Ramaswamy said recently about Americans being soft, not prepared to put in the hard graft, and all this stuff. I tell you, for the experience of most foreigners is true. And it's not true of every American I know. Some of them are the most hardworking, wonderful people in the world. But as a general principle, South Africans are far more resilient and able to withstand this kind of bullshit authoritarian pressure than any American population. So, to my fellow South Africans, let's stick this out. Let's stick up the middle finger to Trump and particularly to Elon Musk, because we know from his background that he left South Africa in the apartheid era and retains the racist bullshit that's motivating these people like Creel. And now that I'm in South Africa, I'm seeing their awesome, ridiculous tweets. Fuck those guys as well. They're the past. Most of us are the future, and it's a beautiful future.
What they wanted was a regime change. The response of them saying that they don't want to go to the US, the culture cannot survive outside of South Africa, they have to stay here. This is unsurprising. The response is unsurprising. I think anyone that's been paying attention is absolutely not surprised by this response, because we know that what they wanted when they were peddling those lies was not refugee status. They wanted a regime change. They wanted the USA to intervene, overthrow the sitting government, and put in a minority government. Basically, they wanted a return to 1948. They wanted a regime change with them, Maburu, in charge. Essentially, they wanted a regime change back to apartheid. I need to correct myself. I said what they wanted. What they want, present tense, still, is a regime change. These people want to overthrow a sitting government. That is why they refused that offer. And that line from the press conference, that whole first-class citizen thing, that is a dead giveaway. That what they wanted was for foreign powers, foreign states to come in, overthrow a sitting government, and put them back in what they, in their minds, they twisted minds, they believe is the rightful place. When I say into labantu kwamele iphele, I'm actually not exaggerating. They are a threat to national security. They are a threat to national security because for as long as they exist, and they're allowed to exist, and they are given airtime, and they are given platforms, they are going to continue to push for a regime change. And that's why they're not even backtracking or apologizing or anything. Instead, they're shifting blame. They're saying the fault, it's the government. Like they're blaming everybody but themselves. Because at the core of it, what they want and what they are hungry for is a regime change and for the sitting government to be overthrown by a foreign power. Those people do not have the best interests of this country at heart. And what happened to the AWB needs to happen to AfriForum, because AfriForum is in fact, and someone already said it, a couple of people actually said it in my other video, that they are no different from the Afrikaans, what are they called again? AWB, Afrikaanse Weerstandsbeweging, I think that's what it stands for. But that hateful organization, more commonly known as the RVB or AWB, this cabal, AfriForum, needs to go gently into the good night, the way that the AWB just lost relevance. In fact, it seems as though the AWB shapeshifted, multiplied, and became AfriForum. Different name, same principles, same hateful tactics, same tendencies, because the AWB also had regime change tendencies. They failed, and then they just went off into obscurity. Then they came back as AfriForum. So, Nje, at some point, you need to cut the head of the snake. I don't know where it is. The historian in me wants to say that all of these people just, they originate from, or they descend from, the original members of Die Broederbond. And if you want to know what Die Broederbond is, there's lots of info. Just Google Die Broederbond. I honestly think that these people, they have ties to that sect. AWB, AfriForum, it's just different variations from my historical analysis, they are connected to Deep Bond. There's just no way.
Okay, so I'm sure we've all seen the executive order by now. Yeah, I'm talking about this. I'm talking about this. Never in my life have I seen someone playing victim to this extent, taking the entire narrative and absolutely twisting it. And you know what? It's not just AfriForum. Yes, AfriForum went and they cried wolf to Trump, saying that they're facing discrimination because of the expropriation bill. But I'm going to 100% guarantee you they are not the only white South Africans that feel this way, okay? A lot of the DA supporters feel this way, okay? A lot of people that are against the expropriation bill without even understanding or even reading it or even looking it up in the first place. A lot of white people feel this way. Even in conversation that you just have in passing with a white person, you'll just be talking to them about inequality, and all of a sudden they're like, yeah, they want to take away our land. Basically, nobody is coming for your penthouse in Sandton. Nobody. It's so sad also to see how nobody understands the history of the Expropriation Act of 1975 and why we needed a new bill, a new act or a new bill to come into effect to be aligned with our constitution. Because the Expropriation Act of 1975 was so flawed because it was relied on heavily by the apartheid government to enact a lot of spatial and racial segregation on the basis of area planning. Nobody understands how this act attributed by using the willing buyer, willing seller principle, how it literally caused those that are marginalized to continue being marginalized and to continue oppressing them, while white people just got away with everything. And this Expropriation Act, let me tell you, or Expropriation Bill, the recent one, it does not even compare with what we actually need for genuine change in this country. It does not even compare with what can be done and what should be done. I think a quote that I'm always going to remember and that this entire situation really just reminds me of is that quote of, to an oppressor, even equality with its inferiors will seem like discrimination and will seem like injustice. And I don't even want to get started on America and how they're handling this entire situation. Are there no lawyers, no critical thinkers in the Republican Party? Zero? Zilch? That's probably not the case. The case is that there is an agenda against South Africa. There has been ever since we went to the ICJ and took Israel to court for their genocide against Palestinians. And not just that, but are we forgetting that the OG victim of apartheid and it coming to an end is also busy stringing Trump with his money and with his network and with his promises? Are we forgetting that this man also has a say?
Was a slave. Everyone.
Yes. Well, not everyone was a slave.
No, everyone was a slave.
Okay, but
we are all descended from slaves.
yeah.
Well, all of us.
Yeah.
We have the descendant of a slave who is also, unfortunately, one of the richest men in the world. We have him who is so against Black South Africans. It's insane. So, yeah, this entire situation, it might be, what is going on? But I saw it coming. I think a lot of us saw it coming with how white people have just been so frustrated. You know why? Because they got away with everything. That's why. And that entitlement, when you get away with everything and you stop getting away with things again, you're going to feel like you were betrayed.
Is welcome. So in this video, I'll be discussing the controversial topic of President Donald J. Trump giving refugee status to Afrikaners. Now, please, constructive discussion is welcome, but any offensive or inappropriate comments will be deleted and I will block you, okay? Don't come and vomit emotional stuff on this platform and, be insulting, etc. I'm going to block you, okay? I want to share a theory with you. I'm not saying I'm right, but something that I think people need to keep into consideration, especially the Afrikaners in this time. Now, I was born and raised in South Africa, Afrikaner, Boer. My father was a farmer. I grew up on a farm, being farmers all my life, and I relocated now to New Zealand. a couple of years ago. My family members are still in the Free State, they're farmers, etc. So I've got a great passion for this topic. I've got a fairly good understanding of the topic, but I want to share something that I think people might be overlooking at this moment in time. And here we go. So the US refugee offer for Afrikaners is likely more a geopolitical move than it is just humanitarian. What people need to understand and remember that the US, especially under President Trump, acts based on national interest, not on ideology. The focus of South Africa's racial policies against the Afrikaners, which it's there. I mean, it's in the law books. There's a lot of regulations written that's against a minority group. So the ANC cannot argue with it. It's there in writing, okay? But remember this, President Trump's focus on South Africa's racial policies might just be a tool to pressure the ANC and also to advance America's national interest. How? How do they do that? Now, we all know that South Africa is part of BRICS, right? With Russia, China, India, Brazil, etc. What does BRICS want to do? BRICS wants to move away from the US dollar being the reserve currency, all right? Gone petrodollar. So BRICS, at this moment in time, they've developed, busy in the development, advancing it, alternative payment systems, alternative to the SWIFT system that we have, etc. And they want to trade and have begun to do so, certain percentages of their goods and services not using the US dollar as the reserve currency. That is a major problem for the United States, especially for President Trump, because people need to remember, President Trump is a nationalist. He loves his country. I recently bought The Art of the Deal, the book that he wrote, about how he's been doing dealing and what's important to him and his principles in that. And in that you can see, I mean, I've watched videos of him from years ago when he was a young man. He's always had a love for the United States of America. And he puts America first. Don't forget that. So here you have the BRICS nations coming, and they want to strip the United States of its global dominance. And Trump will not have that. All right? It doesn't sit well with him. So what happens? South Africa is a BRICS member. And I think what is busy happening here, if you stand back and you look at the bigger picture, it's not so much about racial inequality. It's not so much against racism towards the white people. That's just a catalyst. It's just a trigger to address a bigger problem and to set in motion cause of events that kind of deal with a bigger problem. And what is that problem? It's BRICS. It's South Africa being part of the BRICS nations. Now, if you go and you look at the amount of minerals and resources that are exported to the United States, it's massive. In fact, some of those things, chromium, etc., they use that in their military. And South Africa exports an enormous amount of resources to the United States that they desperately need. The problem is this. A lot of the money that comes in from the United States as payment for resources that's exported to the United States are used against the United States because energy finances resources are going in to move away from the United States and to set up the counterpart or the, how can I say, the competition, which is BRICS and the alliances with other nations that they're busy building, and it's growing. And Trump does not like that. So the thing is, you pour in your money year after year after year after year, millions upon millions, into a country that is actually your enemy in a sense. Because economically, they're moving away from you and they're causing you, or they're chipping away at your authoritative power that you have in the world. And I think that is what's going on here. South Africa's supplies of critical minerals to the United States is vital for their military-industrial complex. So by buying South African minerals, desperately needed by the United States, they are actually funding the BRICS nations that are contradicting Trump's economic policies. So what America needs to do is they need to weaken the ANC. And how do they do that? They are highlighting Afrikaner discrimination. It is going to increase racial divisions in South Africa. No doubt about that. Amplifying tensions in South Africa will destabilize the country. And the more that President Trump will ramp on the pressure on the ANC, the more they are forcing South Africa to reconsider their position in BRICS. And as the ANC becomes weaker and weaker, a weakened ANC allows favorable US trade terms. Because if you look back at history, it's as clear as daylight. The US has a history of using internal conflicts for global strategy. And given South Africa's strong position in BRICS, they have all the reason, very strong reason, to intervene in this whole thing. So America gives South Africa funds, millions upon millions of dollars in trade, but those funds are used against the United States in the form of BRICS. And that needs to stop, I think, according to President Trump. And this is what we are seeing at the moment. Look at the past history. Look at what America did in Venezuela. Look at what they did in Iraq. Look at what they did in all these countries. It's all about national interest. It's not about human rights. All right? It's not at all about human rights. It's always about America's national interest. So I think, and I can be wrong, this asylum offer is likely, most likely, not definitely, but most likely, a geopolitical tactic, not just a human rights issue. What can happen is that the Afrikaners needs to utilize this opportunity. And I think the rest of the country needs to join in and utilize it. And there's a flashlight now on policies of the ANC that is going against the international humanitarian rights and, that whole movement and that's going on around the world. And utilize that to your advantage. The thing is, see the bigger picture, what is happening. So you can either fight this and say, I will not leave my country, I'm not going to do this, etc. And that's fine. You have all the right to stay. But the thing is, there's a bigger thing at play. It's not about you, Afrikaners. It's not about us. All right? It's about America's national interest. You're just a tool on the side. We're just a key that they're using to start something that's going to increase and become bigger and bigger. And more pressure is going to be placed on the ANC, etc. Because South Africa is a strategic deliverer of certain critical minerals to the USA. And America cannot afford to have those minerals in the hands of BRICS. And if Russia takes all of it and China takes all of it, etc., it's going to damage the United States. And there's a shift of power that needs to come. Or let me put it like this. There's a shift of control of South Africa's resources that is busy coming, or that America is working towards, so that it comes more under their domain, not under the BRICS domain. That's my take. Maybe it's plausible, maybe it is not, but just reconsider that, all right? My prayers goes out to my people, the Afrikaners in South Africa, the Boers. My heart goes out, my prayers goes out to the nation of South Africa, and also to the United States. There's a way to work together. There's a way to do this, but maybe it's going to get much worse before it's going to get better. I don't know, but God bless you, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Honeymoon is over. The threats of Donald Trump against South Africa mark the end of the honeymoon for South Africa. From now on, it is going to be a very bumpy ride indeed. Trump effectively gave notice that from now on, South Africa is a prime candidate for regime change. I doubt that the leadership of South Africa have ever given this matter serious thought. Since the days of Nelson Mandela, South Africa was considered a model constitutional democracy. This gave South Africa immunity from blatant foreign political interference aimed at regime change. South Africa was expected to associate with other respected democracies of the world and behave like respectable leaders. But the comrades were infatuated with the idea of the revolution they had failed to ignite. The comrades preferred to be seen with men like Mugabe or Gaddafi or the thieving Guptas. Comrades preferred to shout blood-curdling chants like "kill the Boer, shoot to kill." Diplomats promoted our constitution as one which respects property rights, though there are exceptional circumstances where there might be expropriation with zero compensation. But comrades didn't like this diplomatic language. They preferred to shout that they couldn't wait to grab white property without compensation and shoot the poor and shoot to kill. In other words, in a quest to look like genuine revolutionaries, comrades worked hard to get South Africa to be admitted among nations that are eminently eligible for regime change. Donald Trump has recently issued us with a certificate confirming our credentials as a prime candidate for regime change. That is what Trump's sanctions amount to. A further problem is that the electorate is incapable of moving beyond the ANC and its splinters. So it requires more robust interference to effect regime change here than would be the case if the electorate were more flexible. The imperialist forces may well decide that democracy in South Africa does not work for them. Indeed, it does not work for the man in the street either. But it is preferable to the DRC type of chaos. But that kind of chaos may work best for the imperialists. These scenarios should be considered against the background of an America which is insanely antagonistic to China and scared of their competition. If the ruling classes of South Africa had some sense, they would abandon their diplomatically expensive, fake revolutionary posture. They should agree to eschew provoking America needlessly. They should clamp down on rampant narcissism. It's going to cost us.
It's a hot day in South Africa, and Donald Trump has just come on air to say that he has seen the terrible things going on in South Africa. I live here, and I haven't really seen the terrible things he speaks about. I'm continually amazed at the disinformation that this man sends. I'm amazed that anyone would believe him. We in South Africa are laughing. We honestly are. But what worries me most is that you Americans seem to believe him. Even statements about your own country, you believe that he's doing the best thing. I feel very sad for you and very down. I hope you can get this man out one way or the other. Goodbye.
We cannot build a future for this country until we have dealt with its past. And that is something that we have manifestly failed to do. And it is something that I believe we have to do before we can move on in the way that Joel Pollack says the world has moved on. And how does South Africa build a better future? Redress is critical. It's essential. It is a sine qua non. Without redress, there can be no better future for South Africa. Then the debate, for me anyway, I don't expect you to agree with me, and I know many of you won't, but for me the debate is, how do we implement redress? Clearly, what has been done since 1994 has not worked, or hasn't worked nearly well enough. Too much of the economy is still in white hands. Too many senior posts are still in white hands. The Stats SA's recent income report of, 2 weeks ago, showed again, unequivocally, how apartheid has benefited, the ending of apartheid has benefited white people more than any other population group. Of course there are poor white people. Of course there are elderly white people listening to me now who really struggle to get through the month. Of course they are, but in general, white people have benefited from the ending of apartheid. The inherited privilege has just been added to. And of course there are black millionaires, and of course there are lots of middle-class black people in the professions, as there should be. But redress has not been achieved. And again, in my opinion, and I suspect many black listeners will disagree with me here, that the government refuses to acknowledge that what it has done is wrong. It doubles down. It says we haven't imposed enough conditions on business. We haven't imposed enough conditions on industries. We need this 3% transformation fund. That will achieve transformation. It won't. It's a doubling down on 3 decades of policy that hasn't worked. We have to find a different way. What that way is a more difficult question to answer, but we cannot continue to have the inequalities, the racially based inequalities that still unarguably exist in this country. If we don't begin to close those gaps, if we don't find a way for meaningful, successful redress, then we hand the country over to the likes of the EFF and the MKP. And from that, nobody benefits other than the mandarins in those two parties and their politically connected friends.
Confiscation is where property is taken without any due process. It's simply taken away without the rule of law. Expropriation is a very clear legal process, and that is precisely what South Africa has. We have an Expropriation Act that has been passed after more than a decade of legal processes and endorsement by a democratically elected parliament. It is in line with the Constitution, which is a democratic framework.
AfriForum has finally gotten their way, or have they? They've managed to convince Donald Trump that there's a white genocide happening in South Africa, land grabs are going to happen under the new land expropriation policy, all of which are verifiably untrue. However, they have now poked the bear being Donald Trump, who has now posted on his Truth social media that he is going to take away all funding from South Africa, all trade deals, all funding, all aid, to punish us for this land expropriation bill, which has nothing to do with land grabs, just to be clear. Now AfriForum is freaking out because if Trump does that, if he takes away things like AGOA and other things that make our trading with America easier, do you know who suffers? White businesses. They're the ones who suffer, not the kind of ANC politicians that AfriForum was trying to get a dig at. So now AfriForum is coming out and saying they are going to lobby Donald Trump again, this time to say, no, please don't punish the people of South Africa, just the individual politicians. Can you just sanction them? It is so clearly a political play. And of course Trump fell for it. And of course it's backfired for AfriForum. And it's all farcical if it wasn't for the fact that it has real impacts and effects on us ordinary South Africans, who, by the way, are not out here killing white people in the street.
Let's withhold minerals to US. That is it. If they don't give us money, let's not give them minerals. But the reality, they take our minerals, but say why we're withdrawing funding. No, we have minerals in the continent, and therefore we have something that we have. We're not just beggars, but we must just use that endowment for our benefit as a continent.
The only president I love in Africa is President of Rwanda, Mr. Kagame. He has made a lot of developments in Rwanda.
This is Zulu lesson of the day.
Magahambe.
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 Yeah.